The townsfolk of Silver Creek watched with cruel eyes as Deborah Ellis stumbled through the dust-choked Main Street. Her once fine dress stained and torn from being thrown into the dirt behind Harrington's Grand Hotel. The humiliation burned worse than the late afternoon Arizona sun of 1873, but not as badly as the hunger gnawing at her empty stomach. "Keep walking, soiled dove," someone shouted, throwing a rotten apple that splattered near her feet. Deborah's chin trembled, but she refused to lower her gaze. 3 days ago, she'd been the respected daughter of a businessman. Now, she was nothing but a cautionary tale, the girl who'd been abandoned at a feast by a traveling businessman who'd promised marriage only to disappear with her family's savings and her reputation. She was 22 years old with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her father had disowned her publicly, declaring he had no daughter who would shame the family so thoroughly. Her mother had wept, but said nothing in her defense. The community that had once embraced her now viewed her as nothing but damaged goods. Deborah reached the edge of town where the buildings thinned and the vast expanse of the frontier stretched before her. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the whispers. Her stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since being cast out of her home. The feasting table where she'd last sat, expecting to announce her engagement, now seemed like a cruel dream. The setting sun painted the mountains with gold and crimson as Deborah stumbled down the rutted road leading west. The first stars were appearing when she heard the steady rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. She stepped aside, keeping her eyes lowered, hoping whoever rode by would pay her no mind. But the rider slowed, then stopped altogether. "Miss, you all right out here alone?" The voice was deep but gentle. Deborah looked up to see a man atop a chestnut mare. His face was shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' stubble. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just traveling." He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. As he stepped closer, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27. His eyes were kind but weathered, like he'd seen more than his fair share of hardship. "No one travels these roads on foot after sundown," he said. "Not if they want to see morning." Deborah stiffened. "I have nowhere else to go." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her disheveled appearance and the proud tilt of her chin despite it all. "Name's Daniel Rawlins," he said finally, tipping his hat. "Got a camp set up just over that ridge, nothing fancy, but there's coffee and food if you're hungry." Her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl, and a blush heated her cheeks. Daniel pretended not to notice. "No strings attached, miss. You look like you could use a meal, is all." Every warning she'd ever received about strange men and their intentions rang in Deborah's ears. But the hunger and exhaustion clouding her judgment were powerful adversaries to caution. "I can't pay you," she said frankly, wasn't asking for payment. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Here, it's just trail bread, but it's filling." The simple gesture, offering food without expectation, nearly undid her composure. Deborah accepted the bundle with trembling hands, unwrapped it, and took a small bite. The bread was dense and slightly sweet, still fresh enough to be soft in the middle. "Thank you, Mr. Rawlins," she said softly, managing to maintain her dignity despite the speed with which she devoured the offering. "Most folks call me Dan," he replied, watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Camp's still open if you want coffee to wash that down." "I won't pry into your business." Deborah hesitated, then nodded. "I would be grateful for the coffee, Dan." He helped her onto his horse and led the animal by the reins, walking alongside. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just cautious, like wild animals circling each other from a safe distance. His camp was simple but well organized. A small fire, a bedroll, and saddlebags propped against a fallen log. A coffee pot sat nestled in the embers. "Been working cattle for the Double R Ranch," Dan explained as he poured coffee into a tin cup. "Headed back after delivering a herd to Fort Yuma." Deborah accepted the cup, warming her hands around it. "You're a cowboy, then?" Started as one. "Now I'm the foreman." He settled across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "You got a name, miss?" She hesitated only a moment. Deborah Ellis." "Well, Miss Ellis, you're welcome to share my fire tonight. I'll take you to the next town tomorrow if you'd like." "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. Dan shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "My ma raised me to believe you help folks when they need it. No more complicated than that." As the night deepened, Dan prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. It wasn't elegant, but to Deborah's empty stomach, it tasted better than any feast she'd ever attended. He didn't ask why she was walking alone on a dangerous road, and she didn't volunteer the information. Instead, he told stories about life on the range, adventures with ornery steers, the beauty of dawn breaking over the desert, and the camaraderie of cowboys. His words painted pictures that made Deborah momentarily forget her troubles. "You talk about it like it's more than just work," she observed. "It is," Dan replied. "It's freedom. Every day's different. The sky's always changing, the land stretches farther than you can see, and there's always something new to learn." He paused, looking thoughtful. "Though I admit, sometimes the loneliness catches up to a man." Deborah stared into the fire, thinking about loneliness. She'd never felt more alone than when surrounded by the people who'd turned their backs on her. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. Dan nodded, seeming to grasp the weight behind her words without needing elaboration. "Get some rest, Miss Ellis. You can use my bedroll. I'll keep watch." "I couldn't possibly, I insist," he said firmly. "Been sleeping under the stars most of my life. One more night won't hurt me none." Exhaustion eventually won out over propriety. Wrapped in Dan's wool blanket that smelled of campfire smoke and horses, Deborah fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. She woke to the aroma of coffee and bacon. Dan was already up, tending the fire and preparing breakfast. The morning light revealed features that darkness had hidden: eyes the color of a summer sky, laugh lines at their corners, and a small scar along his jaw. "Morning," he greeted. "Thought you might want to wash up a bit. There's a creek just beyond those cottonwoods. I'll keep my back turned." The cold creek water was revitalizing. Deborah did her best to restore order to her appearance, washing her face and hands and arranging her hair. She couldn't do much about her dress, but at least she felt human again. Over breakfast, Dan asked, "So, where are you heading?" The simple question highlighted her lack of options. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just needed to leave Silver Creek." Dan nodded slowly. "Running from something or towards something, away from shame that wasn't mine to bear," she said after a moment, surprising herself with her candor. "I was betrayed by someone I trusted. My family decided the disgrace was too much to endure." His expression darkened. "Folks can be crueler than any wilderness." "Yes," she agreed softly. "They can." Dan finished his coffee, considering her over the rim of his cup. "The double R could use a cook's helper. Mrs. Holloway's getting on in years and complains about her joints something fierce. It's honest work with a roof over your head, not exactly glamorous, but it's something." Hope fluttered in Deborah's chest, fragile as a butterfly's wings. "You do that." "Recommend me for a position. Wouldn't offer if I didn't think you'd do well," he said simply. "Ranch is about 4 days' ride from here." "I have nothing to offer in return," she warned again. Dan shook his head. "Not asking for anything, Miss Ellis. Just seems to me like you could use a fresh start, and the double R is as good a place as any to find one." As they packed up camp and prepared to ride, Deborah found herself studying the cowboy who'd shown her more kindness in one night than her own family had in her darkest hour. There was something refreshingly straightforward about him, no hidden agendas, no false pretenses. They traveled slowly, Dan being careful not to push his horse too hard with the double burden. He taught Deborah how to spot water sources in the desert landscape, how to read the weather from cloud patterns, and which plants were safe to eat in a pinch. She absorbed the knowledge eagerly, recognizing that survival in this harsh country might depend on such skills. At night, they made camp much like before, except now Deborah insisted on helping with the preparations. Dan showed her how to build a proper fire that would last through the night, and she discovered she enjoyed the simple, practical tasks of frontier living. "Were you always a cowboy?" she asked on the second night, curious about the man who'd become her unexpected protector. Dan stretched his long legs toward the fire. "Pretty much. My pa had a small spread in Texas, lost it during the war. After that, it was just me and the open range. You've never wanted to settle somewhere?" Deborah asked. A shadow passed over his features. "Thought about it. Haven't found the right reason yet, I suppose." On the third day, as they crossed a shallow river, Deborah's curiosity finally got the better of her. "Mr. Rawlins, Dan, may I ask why you're really helping me?" Most men would have expected something in return. His hands tightened momentarily on the reins. "I'm not most men, Miss Ellis. Please call me Deborah," she said. He nodded. "Deborah, then." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer her question, but then he spoke. "My sister was in a situation not unlike yours once. Nobody helped her when she needed it most. I wasn't there to protect her then, but I swore I'd never turn my back on someone who needed help if I could give it." The simple honesty in his voice moved her deeply. "What happened to your sister?" "She died," he said quietly. "Consumption took her eventually, but it was shame and loneliness that really killed her spirit first." Deborah's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," he replied, though the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "Just know I'm not helping you out of pity. Everyone deserves a second chance." That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered hollow, Deborah found herself watching Dan as he cared for his horse. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior, a kindness that extended not just to humans in need, but to animals in his care. It stirred something within her that she'd thought had died with her recent humiliation: trust. "I never thanked you properly," she said as they sat by the fire later. "Not just for the food and shelter, but for not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer." Dan's eyes reflected the dancing flames. "Everyone's got parts of their story they'd rather keep private. Figure you'll share yours when and if you want to." The statement hung between them, an open invitation without pressure. Deborah took a deep breath, suddenly wanting him to know. "I was engaged to be married," she began haltingly. "Or so I thought. His name was Howard Thornton, a businessman from back east. He courted me for months, charmed my parents, promised me the world." Her hands twisted together in her lap. "The night of our engagement feast, he disappeared along with my father's investment in his business venture and several valuable pieces of my mother's jewelry." Dan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "When it became clear he wasn't coming back, my father. He publicly disowned me, said I'd brought shame on the family by associating with such a man, as if I had known." Her voice cracked. "The town turned against me overnight. Women I'd known my whole life crossed the street to avoid me. Men looked at me differently, like I was available for a different kind of arrangement." "That's not right," Dan said quietly, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. "None of that was your doing. It didn't matter. I became the cautionary tale mothers told their daughters." Deborah wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. 3 days ago, I was forcibly removed from a restaurant where I was seeking work. That's when I decided to leave, even with nowhere to go." "And that's when I found you," Dan finished softly. "Yes," she whispered. "That's when you found me." The silence that followed was filled with the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. When Dan finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Seems to me the only person who should be ashamed in this story is long gone," he said. "And maybe those who were too quick to judge what they didn't understand." His simple acceptance washed over Deborah like a healing balm. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt the crushing weight of shame begin to lift from her shoulders. "Thank you for listening," she said. "And for not judging." Dan's smile was gentle. "Get some rest, Deborah. Tomorrow we'll reach Cottonwood Springs. We can resupply there before the final stretch to the ranch." Cottonwood Springs was a small but bustling settlement, a far cry from the respectable town of Silver Creek. Here, no one gave Deborah a second glance as she walked beside Dan toward the general store. "I need to send a telegram to the ranch," Dan explained. "Let them know I'm on my way back with a potential new hire." While he took care of business, Deborah browsed the store's offerings. Her eye caught on a simple blue calico dress that would be far more practical than her current attire. She touched the fabric longingly, then reluctantly moved on, aware she had no money to purchase it. Later, as they prepared to leave town, Dan handed her a package. "Thought you might want this for the rest of the journey," he said casually. Deborah opened it to find the blue dress, along with a comb and a small bar of lavender soap. Her eyes welled with tears. "I can't accept this," she protested weakly, even as her fingers caressed the practical, beautiful garment. "Consider it an advance on your first month's wages," Dan said with a shrug. "Mrs. Holloway will appreciate you showing up looking respectable-like." She changed in the back room of the store, emerging feeling renewed in the fresh clothing. Dan's eyes widened slightly when he saw her, a flush creeping up his neck. "Blue suits you," he said simply. The final day of their journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain. Dan pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, and Deborah found herself hanging on his every word. There was something captivating about his unpretentious wisdom and the easy way he moved through the world. "There it is," Dan said late in the afternoon, pointing to a sprawling ranch nestled in a verdant valley. "The double R." Deborah's stomach tightened with anxiety. "What if they don't want me here?" Dan's hand briefly covered hers where it rested on the saddle horn. "They will. And if they don't, we'll figure something else out. You're not alone anymore, Deborah." The simple statement nearly undid her composure. "You're not alone." How desperately she'd needed to hear those words. The ranch was larger than she'd imagined, with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. Cowboys paused in their work to nod respectfully at Dan as they rode in. An older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Daniel Rawlins. About time you showed your face around here again. Was beginning to think you'd run off to California." "No chance of that, Mrs. Holloway," Dan replied with a warm smile. "Double Artiques home." He dismounted and helped Deborah down from the horse. "This is Miss Deborah Ellis. I mentioned her in my telegram." Mrs. Holloway's shrewd eyes assessed Deborah thoroughly. "You ever worked in a ranch kitchen before, girl?" "No, madam," Deborah answered honestly, "but I'm a quick learner and not afraid of hard work." The older woman's stern expression softened slightly. "Well, at least you're honest. Come on inside then. I'll show you what needs doing." As Deborah followed Mrs. Holloway, she glanced back at Dan. He gave her an encouraging nod that somehow conveyed both reassurance and promise, a silent guarantee that he hadn't brought her here only to abandon her. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences. The work was demanding, but Deborah found satisfaction in it. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent mornings learning to bake bread and preserve fruits, and afternoons preparing the evening meal. Mrs. Holloway was strict but fair, and beneath her gruff exterior lay a wealth of knowledge she seemed pleased to share. Dan was often away from the main house, busy with his duties as foreman, but he made a point to stop by the kitchen when he could. Each visit, no matter how brief, left Deborah with a smile that lingered long after he'd gone. "That boy's sweet on you," Mrs. Holloway observed one afternoon as they shelled peas together on the back porch. Deborah felt her cheeks grow warm. "He's just being kind." The older woman snorted. "Been working this ranch 15 years, girl. Never seen Daniel Rawlins find so many excuses to check if the kitchen needs anything." The observation both thrilled and frightened Deborah. Her judgment in matters of the heart had proven catastrophically flawed once before. And yet, Dan was nothing like Howard Thornton. Where Howard had been all smooth charm and grand promises, Dan was steady reliability and quiet strength. One evening in late September, after most of the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Dan found Deborah sitting alone on the porch steps, gazing at the stars. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She shifted to make room. "Not at all." He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "You're fitting in well here," he observed. "Mrs. Holloway says you've mastered her biscuit recipe better than anyone she's ever taught." Deborah smiled. "High praise indeed." "Are you happy here, Deborah?" he asked suddenly, his voice serious. The question caught her off guard. She considered it carefully before answering. "Happier than I expected to be. It's honest work among good people. That's worth a lot." Dan nodded, seeming pleased by her answer. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future." Her heart quickened. "Oh, there's a piece of land about 2 miles west of here. Good water, decent grazing. Mr. Riordan's been looking to sell it to someone who'll work it right." Deborah waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I've been saving most of my wages these past 5 years," Dan continued. "Finally have enough to make a fair offer on it, build something of my own." "That sounds wonderful," she said sincerely, ignoring the pang of disappointment that his future plans didn't seem to include her. "You'd make an excellent rancher, Dan." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the silver moonlight. "Thing is, Deborah, a man needs more than land to build a proper life. He needs someone to share it with." The air between them suddenly felt charged with possibility. Deborah hardly dared breathe. "I know we haven't known each other long," Dan said quietly. "And I know you've got reason to be cautious about trusting a man's intentions. I'm not asking for an answer right away, just asking if you might consider the possibility of a future, together." Deborah's hands trembled in her lap. "Are you proposing to me, Daniel Rawlins?" "Not yet," he answered honestly. "That wouldn't be fair to either of us, but I am asking permission to court you proper, to give us time to know each other's hearts before making promises." The thoughtfulness of his approach, so different from Howard's whirlwind romance, touched her deeply. Here was a man who understood that trust, once broken, needed time to mend. "I would like that," she whispered. "Very much." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Hesitantly, he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gently enfolding hers. "I can't offer you the life you had in Silver Creek," he warned. "Ranch life is hard, even when it's your own spread." "I don't want that life anymore," Deborah replied truthfully. "I've learned more about what matters in these few weeks than in all my years before." Dan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "When I found you on that road, I thought I was just doing what any decent man would do. Never imagined I'd find someone who'd make me finally understand what I've been looking for all these years." Their courtship unfolded with the changing seasons. Dan taught Deborah to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd learned in finishing school, but astride like a true frontier woman. She discovered a natural affinity for horses and a love for the wild, open country that surrounded the Double R. In turn, Deborah brought touches of gentility to Dan's rough-hewn world. She mended his shirts with neat, even stitches, read aloud from books in the evenings, and slowly coaxed him to speak of dreams he'd never shared with anyone. Their first kiss came on a crisp November afternoon. They'd ridden to the parcel of land Dan hoped to purchase, and he'd shown her the spot where he envisioned building a house someday. It would face east, he explained, so the morning sun would warm the kitchen first thing. The care with which he'd considered such details revealed how long he'd been nurturing this dream. Deborah could almost see it, the homestead rising from this empty stretch of prairie, children playing in the yard, a life built with purpose and love. "It's perfect, Dan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the endless blue of the Arizona sky. "It would be with you in it." The distance between them vanished as naturally as breathing. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tender and unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. When they finally drew apart, Deborah knew with absolute certainty that this was what love was supposed to feel like, not the breathless infatuation she'd felt for Howard, but something deeper and more enduring. By Christmas, the entire ranch knew they were courting. Mrs. Holloway grudgingly admitted she'd need to find a new kitchen helper come spring, though her complaints were belied by the way she'd begun teaching Deborah recipes a rancher's wife should know. On a snowy January evening, as they sat together before the fireplace in the ranch house's parlor, Dan took Deborah's hand in his. "I rode into town yesterday," he said. "The land is mine now, signed all the papers." Deborah squeezed his hand. "Congratulations, that's wonderful news." "There's more," he continued, a nervous edge to his voice. "I spoke with Reverend Thompson while I was there." Her heart began to race. "Did you?" Dan slid from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "Been carrying it since the day I met you, waiting for the right time." He took a deep breath. "Deborah Ellis, I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your courage. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Deborah's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Daniel Rawlins, I would be proud to share your name and your life." They were married in March 1874, beneath an arbor Dan had built with his own hands on their new property. The entire Double R crew attended, along with friends from neighboring ranches. Mrs. Holloway cried openly, though she later denied it vehemently. As spring turned to summer, Dan and Deborah worked side by side to build their home. The main structure was completed by August, a modest but sturdy house with large windows to catch the breeze and the views Deborah had come to love. On their first night in their new home, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Dan pulled Deborah close against his chest. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. "When I found you on that road, you said you had nothing to offer in return for my help." "I remember," she said softly. "You were wrong," Dan whispered. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed: purpose, companionship, love, a reason to build something lasting." Deborah turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me your bread when I was starving, your protection when I was vulnerable, and your name when mine had been tarnished. But most importantly, you gave me the chance to discover my own strength." His kiss was tender in the darkness. "We built this life together, Deborah, equal partners." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Deborah thought about the cruel twist of fate that had sent her stumbling down that dusty road nearly a year before. What had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one she'd left behind. By the following spring, their ranch was thriving: a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, and the promise of more to come. And when Deborah shared the news that their family would be growing by winter, the joy in Dan's eyes confirmed what she'd known since that first night by his campfire. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive in the moments of our deepest despair, disguised as simple acts of human kindness. Their daughter was born on a crisp December morning in 1875, with Mrs. Holloway serving as midwife. They named her Hope, a testament to what had blossomed between them against all odds: a love born from hardship, nurtured with respect, and destined to last a lifetime.